Malta, as a sovereign territory with diplomatic immunity, would be the perfect international guardians of UFO secrecy.
Less than 2 weeks after that, Lee got a letter from England, and blue parchment, beautiful blue parchment with silver lettering on the return address corner of the envelope. The page inside was matching blue parchment with the letterhead in silver on the top, and it was only a 2-paragraph short letter that said, "Greetings, I understand you're coming to Europe soon. I believe we have interests in common. Call me at this number," and he gave me a telephone number, "before you leave." So Lee brought that to the next meeting, and it was signed Mark Nathan, Secretary General of the Knights Templars of Malta.
Not only were Hugh Angleton and James Jesus Angleton Knights of Malta, and remember, James Jesus Angleton seemed to be responsible for a lot of counterintelligence around UFOs that came out from the 50s to the 80s. But the bizarre Knights of Malta UFO connection runs even deeper after further research. Colonel Philip J. Corso, later famous for his claims regarding reverse engineering alien materials at the Pentagon in his book The Day After Roswell, served as a high-ranking intelligence officer in Italy during the post-war period. In fact, he was the personal liaison to the future Pope. He was also a Knight of Malta. Perhaps the most powerful general at the time, General Douglas MacArthur and his whole intelligence staff, Knights of Malta. And another CIA founder, Wild Bill Donovan, who journalist Chris Sharp notes was likely not only involved in the Magenta crash retrieval, but in setting up original protocols for UFO crash retrievals, was also a Knight of Malta. Atomic Energy Director turned CIA Director John McCone, later CIA Director Bill Casey, Knights of Malta, Stanley McChrystal, and many of the members of JSOC themselves are all Knights of Malta. Well, President Roosevelt's Vatican envoy, Myron Taylor, also a Knight of Malta.
Well, I didn't know who the Knights Templars were or anything else, but it looked like expensive stationery and a nice signature, Mark Nathan and all that. We looked at it, we decided we don't need any help. Screw him, we're not going to call the number. So 10 days later, we got another letter, said you did not respond to our last communication. Please call me at this number, and the same number again, when you get to London. This time, the letter was on white parchment with gold stamping on the envelope and gold letterhead on the paper. And it was signed Mark Nathan, Secretary, whatever it is, of the House of Commons. And it was on House of Commons stationery. So we thought, gee whiz, this guy gets around, whoever he is, but we're not going to call him because we don't need any interference. So we bought our tickets at Laker and waited for it to go, and we left on an unscheduled departure and arrived at Heathrow Airport at an unscheduled time, and we got off the airplane, took our bags and walked to the subway station to catch it down to Victoria Station, downtown London. The train left every 5 minutes, because we could have been on any train. When we got to Victoria Station, went up the stairs to the starter platform at the railroad station there, and we see the line of black taxis out the door on the side. We know it, we're supposed to take the front taxi, and we're standing there trying to decide whether we'll have a sandwich or something before we get in the taxi or go on the taxi and do it later. When a big black guy, big guy, came up, tapped me on the shoulder. "You're Mr. Elders?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I've got your taxi. Come with me." We said, "What about the taxis out there?" He said, "I've got your taxi. Come with me." And he took us around the end of the taxis and around the corner out of sight of the other cabbies in the line there, put us in the same kind of a London taxi, big black limousine taxi, locked us in, and then we drove around town. I started to tell him we were going to stay with a gunnery sergeant down in Kensington. He says, "I know where you're going." And he drove around and got us completely lost. Then he pulled up in front of a hotel on the south side of Hyde Park. It's the Grosvenor House Hotel. He said, "This is an interesting place. Movie stars live here." And he parked the taxi on the only striped spot for a taxi in front of that whole hotel, and got out, took us out, then locked the cab and left it there and took us inside. And he took us up the elevator to the 5th floor and down a corridor on the left of about 4 doors or 5 doors, made a secret knock on the door, tick, 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 tick. The door opened and a round face with round glasses looked out, and they said something, and the door went all the way open. He motioned for us to go in. It was a very small kitchenette arrangement with just a refrigerator and a hot plate and a sink, and the door on the other end. And the same man went and opened that, said something to somebody inside, motioned for us to go in, and it was a big living room with a 4-cushion sofa on one side, facing a huge full-wall picture window like that. And there was a love seat over here on this side, a coffee table in front of that, a coffee table in front of mine. And he was sitting over in the corner, standing in front of a big, fat, black, overstuffed chair, leather chair, with a table on each side of the arms. And he said, "I'm Mark Nathan." And we said, "Oh, nice to meet you." He said,
Thanks for the
well,
ride.
he said, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. Do you mind? And we all started sitting down, and just as he sat down, the white telephone on one side rang. Ring, 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 ring. And I looked at Lee, and he looked at me. We'd heard that ring in Billy's house. And Lee had already explained to me that no telephone can ring 10 rings because there's only 6 cams on the lobe, or 6 lobes on the cam. So you can only get 6 longs or shorts in any combination, no 10 rings. And that was a signal to Billy when he didn't recognize whether he was thinking something up or whether they was being transmitted. The phone would ring 10 times and he would know it was them transmitting until he got accustomed to recognizing the reception, physically. So anyway, we look at each other, and Mark Nathan is over there by his chair saying, "Hello, hello, hello, hello." And he says, "I wonder who could call this line." And he said, "I'll call the operator." So he called the operator. He says, "Did you ring?" She said, "No." He said, "Could anybody call in this room without going through your switchboard?" She says, "Not in this hotel." He said, "Well, my phone rang. How do you account for that?" She didn't know how. And he's puzzling over that when he puts the phone back down and he starts to talk again. The red phone on the other side rang. 10 short rings. Ring, 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 ring. And Lee and I looked at each other again, and same thing, nobody on the line. And he says, "This is a discrete line. This line is supervised all the time. It's a hotline." He said, "There's an operator on it all the time." And he punched the button and says, "Did you call?" She said, "No." He said, "Could anybody call this room from anywhere else?" She says, "Of course not." And he put that down, and he's shaking his head. Lee said, "Did you notice that was a strange ring?" He says, "It was a strange ring." Lee says, "That was 10 shorts." He said, "That's the Palladium's signal to Billy Meyer to confirm what he's thinking is a telepathic transmission." And then he got real excited about it. So he asked us if we would look for certain things in the household. Said they tried to penetrate it for 2 years, couldn't get anybody inside because they were all close friends, and they weren't able to put anybody in there.
You're talking about Mark Nathan.
Mark
CIA.
Nathan's asking us to
trying
do that. Yeah,
infiltrate
he's
Billy's group.
introduced to us as a case officer for London. Lee told me later that the case officer term means that he's the senior CIA officer in the London district, and that he controls all the CIA operations. And we're in the big dog's office right there on Grosvenor Park. And the American embassy is on one side, the Russian embassy is on the other. And he's asking us to look into the case when we get to Switzerland. He knows where we're going and what we're going to do. And we never got in or out of Switzerland ever without being picked up by this same big black cabbie. Always knew where we were. Where we get off the boat train, the cabbie's there. Wherever we arrived in London, the cabbie's there waiting. And he would take us right to Mark Nathan. We had no choice. We couldn't go anyplace else. And
Mark would he wouldn't take your evidence. He would photograph, or they would borrow it. What would they do with the evidence that you had?
which? No,
Mark Nathan.
When we'd come back, he picked us up right with our baggage and everything else and take us right to Mark Nathan's office. And Mark would say, "Did you get anything this time?" I'd say, "Oh, yeah, some more pictures." He'd say, "Can I see him?" And I'd hand them to him, and he'd give them to somebody else, and they'd go out of the room. Then they'd come back in and he'd hand them back to me. I had contact notes, same thing. When I came back with 1,800 pages of contact notes, he wanted to see them, I handed them to him, they went out of the room and came back and he handed them back to me. I'm sure they made copies then.
So the Knights Templar of Malta. Greetings and welcome to Ancient Library and this rather short episode in which I want to give you my thoughts on the Knights Templar of Malta and draw some connections to the B.M.C. as you have seen in the previous sequence of this program. So at first I want to ask the general questions: who are the Knights of Malta and what is their connection to UFOs? Could it be that they are the selected group of people who work in the highest echelons of intelligence and other deep state heavy areas, for example generals and admirals embedded in the military-industrial complex, who are united in efforts to push certain UFO agendas, creating misinformation to control the narrative potentially inspired by national security, geopolitics, and last but not least, efforts to distort the vision of the public eye on their shenanigans, to evade repercussions for hiding ontological shocking truths from the world? And vice versa, they are highly interested in genuine UFO cases to increase their knowledge and make profit from these contacts and UFO interactions in a plethora of possibilities. For example, UFO tech and therefore opportunities to strengthen their own military, etc. That brings us to Wendelle C. Stevens, rest in peace, a UFO researcher from an older generation who you just heard in the previously played clip, in which he explains how the interactions with the, he labeled them CIA, were going on all the trips he took to Switzerland to visit Billy Meier. I will keep an open mind here, so I will consider the possibility that his whole story about Mark Nathan could be highly flawed, but for me this is just a little piece of a way bigger picture which reflects the quality of this unique UFO case. One option could be that they used the Knights of Malta as an, I would say, costume to increase the chances a UFO guy, in this case Wendelle Stevens, will respect their offer and cooperate. A little like profiling, using a certain type of persona to get more engagement with certain people. So a UFO guy will maybe value the words coming from a Knight of Malta a little more, like from a random US intelligence agency, which in this case did not work. Like he said after he received the first letter, which was essentially saying, please cooperate, we got something in common, his partner received the second letter, which was addressed by the House of Commons of all things. We got something in common, House of Commons, maybe I'm overthinking this one, but this detail seemed a little weird to me. Never mind. So are the Knights of Malta the specific group which operates far away from law and order in a CIA type of way to collect genuine information and spreading counter-intel? For example, Wendelle Stevens mentioned that every piece of evidence was going through the hands of Mark Nathan's group, so I don't know the exact circumstances, but this could be an explanation for the in parts problematic and also missing sets of pictures, speaking of evidence from the B.M.C, which were going overseas through that kind of process. So after the premise, the CIA could not infiltrate Billy Meier's camp, so they decided to discredit the whole case by planting false and foul evidence and so forth. Just one theory from my side, but this would be pretty much match the current state of high stigma and bad reputation in regards to the whole case, especially in comparison to other active factions in ufology which represent cases which are on a similar level of high strangeness, but for whatever reason are gaining way more traction and also own a relatively good reputation. One particular example I want to mention here is the Chris Bledsoe case, which just seems like it's the US CIA version of Billy Meier, which is clearly not getting overly stigmatized by unnatural, non-organic causes. I got plenty of projects coming covering these subjects and connections, and I will leave it at that for this quick video. I just wanted to present my thoughts on the Knights of Malta UFO connection in form of this small update. And if you are interested in more general data on the B.M.C, check out my other more in-depth videos about the case. I will be back soon, LIBRA.
I can take the ghost out of a body and keep it unborn.